Good day, everyone. For this video, we will be talking about the book we've chosen, Recuerdos de Patay and Other Stories by Caroline S. Howe. Let's dive in together in stories of the dead, paranormal, folklore, and different cultures all at once.
Let's talk about our author first. She is Caroline S. Howe, born on August 30, 1969. She received her bachelor's degree in English from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and her master's and PhD in English Language and Literature from Cornell University. She is currently a professor of Southeast Asian Literature at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies in Kyoto University. Her research interests are elite networks and circulation in the Philippines and East Asia, nationalism in literature in the Philippines, and Chinese overseas in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Caroline Howe also specializes in cultural studies, with her stating that her research deals with the historical formation, trajectory, and cultural and political consequences of elites in the Philippines and East Asia more generally. They also tackle issues regarding nationalism and how it influences Filipino writings in English, Filipino, and Chinese. Some of her published works include Necessary Fictions, Philippine Literature and the Nation 1946 to 1980, The Chinese Question, Ethnicity, Nation, and Region in and Beyond the Philippines, and Tiempo Muerto, a novel. Currently, she also co-writes a blog with fellow writer Trixie Alano Reguial titled Ika Nga Blog.
Diving into our selected stories, on the screen are the stories we have selected. We will discuss its formal elements and analyze each one in order to understand the text as a whole and the message it wants to convey.
The story Recuerdos De Patay revolves around the character Don Simon, who paints the dead for the memories of the living. Oleg is a man who serenaded their niece, Siling, multiple times. That was until Oleg joined the Guardia Civil. Many people think that they rejected him, but in truth, Siling did not show any response whether she missed him or not, so they did not react. Unfortunately, it all changed when on her 16th birthday, she could not stop crying and jumping at the slightest noise. She also took anything that was sharp enough and began slicing herself. They were desperate, but suddenly, Simplicia, his wife, remembered that she liked to draw when she was little. So Don Simon started giving her lessons every day. Doña Pasha and Don Manuel commissioned him to paint their deceased 5-year-old daughter, Milagrin, as they requested, and he affirmed that he would make his painting as close as possible to how they wanted them to remember her. As he was painting, he encountered difficulties in imagining a 5-year-old girl as her parts were not properly developed yet, and there was nowhere where he could exemplify emotion. Thus, he used and combined his niece Siling and Milagring to create an image he could think of Milagring. After he finished the structure of the painting, he bid goodbye and went back home to finish the rest. Unfortunately, he found Siling right outside with mud all over her body. She screams that she was dead. Pointing to the painting, the fight continued until Siling suddenly attacked him, wounding him in the process. She was caught by Doru and restrained afterward. Unfortunately, as the days came by, he was gradually weakening, and when a doctor came by and checked up on him, he saw in the eyes of the doctor that he was already looking at a dead person. Apparently, his niece Siling has become a mangkukutod, a Kapampangan folk monster.
The characters from this story practicum are students from the University Belt area sent to conduct a weight gain program in a small village, particularly the students May, Sarah Jane, and Judy, together with Maestro and Aliva. The story goes like this. On the last stretch before graduation, 27 students from diverse schools along the University Belt were sent to finish their last leg of practicum in a small village far from the capital. They sheltered into a maestro's house in order to execute the weight gain program they were tasked to do to alleviate the malnutrition in the village. As tally and weight measurements became parts of their daily grind, they soon wondered about the lack of visible pregnant women, leading them to discover the secrecy of the village. Practicum has the themes of death and paranormal forces. The conflict in this story rises as one of the themes begins wondering about the uncommonness of pregnant women in the village. May, Sarah Jane, together with Judy, came to discover that the villagers have the fear of the pregnancies, which led to many deaths. The mothers drowned in the stream inside the woods, leading them to their very own deaths. Practicum is a story that depicts the difference of life between urban and rural living. There is also the depiction of practices and beliefs between the two. The village is far from the capital, but it is not estranged to modern knowledge, especially medicine. This plays the vital role of their rejection of medical advice towards the deaths that happened in the village, with the blame of postpartum depression. The story showcases the difference in perceptions and acceptance when it comes to paranormal or entities not known to science.
Nukumori is a story about a Filipina and a Japanese man who met in a bar, who would hook up often during the man's stay in the Philippines while finishing his master's thesis. The man would wait for the woman to visit his hotel room and they would engage in lovemaking. As their bond grew, the Japanese man would talk about his business staying in the Philippines, but the woman would not ask her personal questions such as when will the man leave the country. The Filipina would tell stories about the man she was dating, who is a married man and was currently upset at her because she and the man's wife saw each other accidentally in a restaurant. After weeks of seeing each other, the woman suddenly stopped showing up to his hotel room, but the only thing he did was get back to his old routine. Several years later, he came back to the Philippines as a married man with children and as a member of the research team, and he would stay up late to drink and sleep in his hotel room for 7 days. The story ends with a realization from the man that even if the Filipino woman came in the bar, he would not have recognized her. This short story shows the act of escape for both of the characters. They would escape their own lives for a little while by hanging out, doing things without giving a care to the world. It could also mean a pastime for them without a strong sense of bond or commitment to each other. This could also connect to a modern slang called ghosting, which means when someone stops showing up or talking to someone they don't have a clear label of relationship with.
The Gorge opens with the story of an undergraduate student who had fallen to his death in a gorge just near the home of our main character, Melinda Torres. From there, we bear witness to Melinda's inner musings, from her comparisons between Ithaca and Manila, her thoughts regarding the recent suicide, and her general detachment and little emotional involvement in her graduate life. Later in the story, she meets up with her professor, and they have a semi-serious talk, leading to further realizations regarding life in Ithaca and what this means for her in her future. It shows alienation, a conflict or a loss of personal and/or cultural identity. The Gorge presents a common dilemma faced by those who leave their homeland: the loss of self and identity. Melinda struggles with connecting to her campus life in Ithaca, often being completely disengaged, a stark contrast to her strong involvement in her previous school years in the Philippines. Through the story, we are offered the realization that sometimes, despite the temptation of seeking more from the outside world, it is from where we truly came from that we can find our real worth and meaning in life.
For our last story, Fire Trees and Orange Sundays is a story about Asan, a woman of a Filipino-Chinese family who prepares to depart for the United States for postgraduate studies as a scholar. In the beginning, she bids farewell to her lover, Mina, as both have not confided in the former's mother on the nature of their relationship. Throughout the story, Asan recalls memories related to connections with her family. She would recall trips with her mother, her attendance of her brother Kendrick's funeral, and the last days of her father. In the end, Asan would remember Fire Trees and Orange Sundays fondly because of Kendrick. The Fire Trees and Orange Sundays is a story of loving one's family despite the struggles in doing so. The story centers around three core aspects of Asan's feelings towards her family: reluctance to adhere to the Chinese rituals with her mother, coping with the loss of her brother, Kendrick, in an unfortunate circumstance, and the continued presence of the Chinese traditions following her father's passing. The title of the story clearly distinguishes the close bond between Asan and her brother Kendrick as she recalls the Fire Trees and Orange Sundays that shaded their looban. Through the different stories, The influence of cultural studies as a bridge for the narratives is clear. Each story focuses on the relationship between Filipino and other cultures, such as Chinese, Japanese, etc. An interesting distinction to make is how certain aspects of each culture are used to explore common themes. Among these themes is different forms of love and human interaction, whether familial, romantic, or platonic. For example, Recuerdos de Patay focuses on family intertwined with Filipino culture, while Fire Cheese and Orange Sundays focuses on family intertwined with Filipino and Chinese culture. These relationships are vital in better understanding how families function within the circumstances of their culture. Asan in Fire Trees and Orange Sundays clearly showcases a struggle with conforming to their family's Chinese culture and social status. Another relevant subject to discuss is the close examination of a particular aspect in each culture. To illustrate, in Nukomori, hookup culture is analyzed from the perspective of characters who belong to different cultures, a Filipino woman, and a Japanese man. In the grand scheme of things, the story depicts this specific culture as a means of escape from internal strife and dissonance. Additionally, death is a common theme around the stories and is used as a vehicle to understand how people conceptualize death and deal with situations related to it. In particular, Practicum and Recuerdos de Patay are stories centered around the paranormal and how it correlates with death. Death is more than a tool that depicts what is lost, but a presence that there is something to lose. Through post-mortem painting or superstitions of death related to pregnancy, death has morphed into different perceptions depending on the culture and the manner in which they are delved into.
The entire story could really exemplify cultural studies, with all the revolving stories from folklore to different kinds of culture, from Chinese to Filipino culture. Each story has its own perspective. Logically, with the way things were written from culture itself, even if it was a tradition 100 years ago, like in Recuerdos de Patay or Memories of the Dead, where you take a picture or paint a picture of the dead as if it were alive for the memories of the bereaved families. These were ideas or perceptions that started in infancy and are now gradually developing over time, thus becoming a part of a culture, which is a perfect way for cultural study. The other stories, meanwhile, such as in the Nukumori, on how to hook up culture is defined by different perspectives, a Filipino woman and a Japanese man. The Japanese, throughout the course of their histories, had brothels, whilst in the Philippines, that kind of thing was illegal and looked down upon. Such contrasting cultures started from the past and then gradually developed. One of these reasons could be the development of religion, whereas in the Philippines, Christianity prospered and in Japan, Shintoism prospered. Different religions, two different geographies, two different sets of people, and thus two different cultures. Lastly, the concept of death and the paranormal is heavily implied or illustrated in the stories, such as in Recuerdos de Patay and Practicum. The concept of life and death, as well as its important interpretation, changes how society views it and its accompanying cultures and traditions. In Recuerdos, the concept was so profound that in order for them to lay the dead to rest and have the family to find peace, they had to take a picture or paint a picture. This is an example of a culture that was developed over the perspective and views of the people around in a community, thus turning it into a part of one's culture.
That is it for our presentation about Recuerdos de Patay and other stories. I hope this video delivered fruitful insights for everyone to ponder upon. Thank you and have a great day!